In this video, I'm going to project the ratings that I think EA Sports is going to assign to the Atlanta Falcons incoming draft class for Madden 22. I'm making these projections by comparing the Falcons rookies to rookies from last season at their position with roughly similar draft positions. For example, I compared wide receiver Frank Darby to other wide receivers who were drafted somewhere between rounds 5 and 7. I also used other information like scouting reports and pre-draft projections to try to fine-tune those ratings. But ultimately, my goal was to try to project how EA will rate these players as accurately as possible. Now, before I get into the ratings, I want to give one last disclaimer. If this is your first time visiting my channel, my typical content is focused on the Arizona Cardinals. But after doing a ratings projection video for the Cardinals, I thought it would be fun to try to project the ratings for the other teams in the NFL. So if you do subscribe to my channel, expect a lot of Arizona Cardinals content. If you're not really interested in Cardinals content and you don't want to subscribe, that's okay. But I would appreciate if you'd click like on this video. That certainly does help. So without further ado, let's start with wide receiver Frank Darby. The Falcons selected Darby with the 3rd pick in the 6th round of the NFL draft. And based on comparisons with other receivers drafted in this range, I settled on an overall grade of 66. Most receivers drafted in the 6th round were rated somewhere between 64 and 66, with receivers in the 5th round rating as high as 68. But after comparing pre-draft grades to those of other receivers drafted in this range, 66 seemed like the right overall rating. Next up is cornerback Avery Williams. The Falcons select him with the 39th pick in the 5th round, and my ratings projection for him is an overall of 64. Now, cornerbacks drafted in the 6th round range from 64 to 67, and the reason I went with the low end on this range was that Williams was considered a little bit of a reach based on some pre-draft projections. It's possible he could have a higher rating, obviously, but this is what seemed to make the most sense based on my analysis. Next up is defensive end Anidokumpo Ogundeji. Ogundeji was the 38th pick in the 5th round, and based on comparisons, I'm projecting an overall rating of 64. The overall rating for players at his position didn't vary a whole lot between rounds 5 and 7. The low end was 63 and the high end was 66. And taking all things into account, 64 seemed like the right number. With the 4th pick in the 5th round, the Falcons selected defensive tackle Taekwon Graham, and I'm projecting an overall rating of 63 for Graham. Like Ogundeji, there wasn't a lot of variation in the overall ratings for Graham's comps. The defensive tackles I looked at were all rated between 62 and 64, with both of the 5th round tackles I looked at rated at 63. Next up is center Drew Dahlman. Dahlman was selected with the 9th pick in the 4th round, and I'm projecting an overall grade of 65. Players drafted at his position between rounds 3 and 5 ranged from as low as 61 to as high as a rating of 68, and ultimately I settled on a rating of 65. The next player I'm going to look at is cornerback Darren Hall. The Falcons selected Hall with the 3rd pick in the 4th round, and based on comps, I'm projecting an overall rating of 67. The cornerback comps I looked at between rounds 3 and 5 ranged from ratings of 65 overall to 68 overall, and both of the cornerbacks I looked at who were selected at the beginning of the 4th round were 67 overall. So everything seemed to point to 67 being the right number for Hall. Next up is offensive tackle Jalen Mayfield. Mayfield was selected with the 4th pick in the 3rd round, and I'm projecting a grade of 66 overall. The tackles I looked at as comps ranged from as low as 60 overall all the way up to 66 overall. And after looking at everything, I felt like he deserved to be at the top of this range. With the 8th pick in the 2nd round, the Falcons selected safety Richie Grant. And based on the comps, I'm projecting a grade of 73. The comps I looked at in the 2nd round ranged from as low as 70 to as high as 75. And in comparing Grant to these players, I felt like 73 was the right rating. And finally, we get to the player that Atlanta Falcons fans are most excited about, tight end Kyle Pitts. Now, it was really tough finding good comps for Pitts because so few tight ends are selected in the 1st round, and because many evaluators consider him to be the best tight end they've ever scouted. In the end, I decided to go with an overall grade of 79. Now, some fans feel like he should be graded higher, and I wouldn't necessarily argue against that, but there were a couple things I took into account. The highest rated tight end in recent years was TJ Hawkinson, who had an overall grade of 77 as a rookie, and I felt like Pitts' grade should be higher than that of Hawkinson's. But I also took into account the fact that EA recalibrated grades a few years back, and since that recalibration, rookie rookie grades typically have not gone over 80. In fact, the highest rookie grades are usually right around 77 or 78. So overall, this was a really hard grade to decide on. I do think, though, that Pitts is going to have an X-factor development trait. But overall, I feel like the range for Pitts is anywhere from 77 to 81. So what kind of grades do you expect for the Falcons rookie class? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video.